this is supposed to be a workshop, but we want you to think of it more like a rap session. So we have about 2 hours to fill, basically. So we're gonna talk, and then y'all are gonna talk, and we're all gonna be in there together. But I want to dispel one thing real quick. Me and Bridget are on the exact same level. We are both Ambi-nominated podcasters. We're going head-to-head in one category this time, so we're on the same level. So I'm just wanted to make sure that's clear. So great. Today we're going to be talking about problem solving for a shifting landscape. But before we get to that, we want to get into a little bit about what Bridget does, because it's a good introduction into kind of the larger topic at hand, which we'll start to talk about a little bit. So, Bridget, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey y'all, I am Bridget. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a podcaster and a producer. My main kind of tentpole podcast is called There Are No Girls on the Internet. And as Kyle said, it's really an exploration of the ways that people who are traditionally marginalized, so women, queer folks, black folks, people of color, working class folks, trans folks, all of us are, I don't know, institutionally left out of conversations about technology, even though we are the ones who make technology fantastic. What would Twitter have been without black folks, right? It would be so boring. And so I really want to peel back the layers of the ways that we really are contributing to what it means to be online.
That's great. Let's hear the trailer real quick. Play clip 1, please. It'll probably start playing magically at some point.
Okay.
In the meantime, how did you end up here in podcasting?
Wow, this is such a great question. So I was always a professional podcast appreciator. I loved podcasts. I had just moved sight unseen to San Francisco, California, for a job in tech. And when I was there, for whatever reason, I was having a really hard time like making friends and finding my community. And the community that was there for me was podcasts. So I would like rush home from work and put on my favorite podcast. From there, I saw a job application for a producer on a podcast, and I was like, this is a sign I should apply for this. I sent in my resume. They called me for an interview. They were like, do you know how to cut tape? Have you ever used Final Cut Pro? I said, of course, I do it all the time. I had no idea what any of this was. I was just agreeing to anything. I got the job, and then I was like, oh, I now have to teach myself how to edit tape. I have to teach myself how to use these tools. Luckily, there was YouTube. So I got my first job in podcasting in around 2010. I always say like me in podcasts, my work in podcasts predates Serial, which is like, in my mind, kind of a big thing. And yeah, I think there was something about the space that felt kind of Wild West at the time. Like people didn't really know what we were doing. Like they
kept calling it internet radio.
Yes. And yeah, there was something that really drew me to that. Like it felt like a space for weirdos who were just trying stuff out, and weirdos are my people, so I stuck.
What was it like teaching yourself on, because a lot of the skill set that I got on podcasting came from YouTube University as well. Like, what was it like teaching yourself? Did you find, were you making mistakes constantly, or how did you fix things as you were turning them in?
Oh gosh, I mean, I was making mistakes that I didn't yet know were mistakes. And I look back at that time and I almost feel lucky that it wasn't a more established field, because nobody knew what they were doing. It was an emerging platform, so it wasn't like anybody had gone to school for it or had a degree for it or like knew what they were talking about. And so in a lot of ways, I think I got to play with the form in ways that you would never get to do now. And all of the stuff that you think of as like normal parts of podcasting, like maybe your host has a sign-off thing that they say all the time. People were tinkering with that then. Like all of that stuff came together then. And so it just kind of felt like these mistakes would go on to be things that became hallmarks of the medium. I'm curious, as another YouTube University graduate, how was it for you?
I mean, for me, I was just copying what the industry bests were doing. So it was like, I was saying this podcast is produced by Oates Big Round Studios, and I'm like, it's just me. I'm Oates Big Round Studios. So I'm like saying stuff like that. Like I had credits, all of that. And my only goal was to make it sound good. So in those early days, it wasn't hard to do that, but a lot of people didn't know how to do that. So I felt like that was an advantage that we had.
In my earliest days, I was like doing a Black woman impersonation of Ira Glass, and I can hear myself doing it in some of my early episodes. It's horrible.
Yeah, no, I think we all were trying to be Ira Glass at that time. Why did we get that clip? All right, let's play the clip.
Oh gosh. I'm Bridget Todd, and I've spent my whole career exploring how marginalized people shape culture. I used to run a feminist podcast called Stuff I'll Never For You. And before that, I helped activists use the internet to push for social change. It's been a really exciting time to be organizing online. We've seen huge movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter take off. Movements that were largely started and run and shaped by Black people. I'm Bridget Todd, and I've spent my whole career exploring how marginalized people shape culture. This is torture for me. And before that, I helped activists use the internet to push for social change. It's been a really exciting time to be organizing online. We've seen huge movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter take off. Movements that were largely started and run and shaped by Black people within and other marginalized spaces. And it got me thinking, when it comes to cool and important shit popping off online, we always run the show. Yes, we use the internet to build movements, which the kind you're seeing about today, but women, Black folks, and other marginalized voices also shape culture, make art, and connect with each other, using tech in ways that have a big impact on internet culture.
Excellent. So talk to me about like the purpose. Like why do you think There Are No Girls on the Internet needs to exist?
So for me, and listening to that trailer kind of takes me back to where I was when I first came up with the pitch for the show. Mm-hmm. For me, I kind of got tired of these conversations about technology and the internet that just center one very specific perspective and narrative. And we have this idea that technology and the internet is a white, cis boys club. And other people have been trying to break into that. And I believed that story for a very long time. But when you looked closer, I realized, women have been there the whole time, Black folks have been there the whole time, queer folks, trans folks, we've all been there the whole time. And if you didn't hear our voices or our stories, it's not because we didn't exist, it's because those voices were silenced or ignored. And I also kind of got sick of, this was around 2020, so it was around the time where just a lot going on, we'll say that, and we'll get into it. But I would often see these flashy, splashy headlines about, a tech company is doing something that is great, good for them, applause, applause. And you would read the article, and it doesn't say, they only did this because somewhere down the line, an organizer or an activist or somebody from a marginalized background pushed them to do that. And I just got sick of that story not being told. I have to give it up to one of my earliest guests, Allison Turcos, an amazing activist. Stories like theirs are the stories that make technology what it is, but we don't hear those stories. Those are not stories that are told often. And so I really wanted to build a platform where we could have a different perspective and really center people who are often left out of the conversation. Not just people of color, but us, yes, but anybody who feels like their perspective is not grounded in conversations about tech. We want to say, come on in. It'll be inclusive, it'll be accessible, it'll be fun, it'll be engaging. You will leave this conversation feeling like you understand what's going on and you are fired up to make a change.
I understand how it started. As we make podcasts, they continue to change. All of a sudden, it becomes what it's supposed to be. Do you feel that in the beginning, especially starting in 2020, it's 2024 now? How do you note how the podcast has changed since then, and kind of what the mission statement is now?
So in 2020, I was really interested in exploring how activists specifically were using technology and social media. This was a time where how could you not be having conversations like that?
Yeah.
I think today I am much more interested in things that you might not think of as technology, right? So what interesting conversation is popping off on social media? Who is doing something interesting using the internet or using technology? What are the stories that are going underlooked or under scrutinized? Back in 2020, I was much more interested in an activist bent, because I think that's what was on everybody's mind. I actually remember changing the first 4 episodes of the show to be more about activist movements and activist causes and how people were using technology there.
Yeah. What is there, when you think about that time and you think about kind of the attention and kind of tease out where we're going, why do you think the feedback that you're getting at the time from folks, I imagine, is different from what you were getting now? What types of feedback were you getting about the show in those days, especially since you're talking so much about activism?
Yeah, in my first few pitch meetings, everybody was like, you should change this. Instead of having it be explorations of technology and the intersection of technology, the internet, and identity, you should make it about careers. So make it about women working in tech and like career advice for women in tech. And they had come up with kind of a mock-up of me in a blazer, kind of like this, which like no shade to people who make podcasts like that, but I don't own a blazer, right? So this was like the wrong format for me. And again, it just kind of made me realize that the people who were making the decisions, when it comes to people of color or women or other traditionally marginalized people and technology, they really had a very narrow track that they really put us on, right? It was like, oh, certainly you want to be talking about how to navigate a tech career. And at the time, there were so many interesting podcasts that were thoughtful and creative and like gave you the head tinglies because they had such interesting conversations. And I wanted that for us. I think that we deserve the heady conversations that you get on any other like podcast. I didn't like the implication that when it came to marginalized people, the only thing that we would be interested in exploring is like how to get a good tech career. There's so much more to our experience online than that. And so yeah, that's some of the pushback I got.
Why do you think podcasting is the right medium for this message?
I mean, as well as I do, it's a very special medium, I think, one, because of the intimacy. I have had times in my life where I'm falling asleep to podcasts. I'm like listening to my favorite podcast hosts in my ears every day. And so I think there's an intimacy and a trust that I just don't find in other mediums. You could read an op-ed that somebody's written and you're like, okay, I get it. You could hear them in their own words and their own voice explain why something is important to you and why it should be important to everybody, and it just hits so differently. So I don't know, there's just something about a platform that allows people to express themselves in their own words, in their own voice, that just hits like nothing else.
Let's go ahead and play that second clip. If someone is...
In the last few weeks, I've seen a lot of people and companies that I like and respect in the technology space posting initiatives in support of the Black community. Offers of mentorship, offers of seed money for Black businesses and startups. I want to be clear that I think these offers are coming from the right place, and I'm happy to see them. But when you pull them apart, sometimes they can be a little weird. Like the assumption that Black folks in tech automatically need white mentorship, or framing funding of Black-led projects as a kind of charity. Some of that just didn't sit right with me. And even that assertion feels wrong. Can I be critical of an offer that was made with good intentions, but actually kind of supports a system that assumes Black voices are charity cases? It's uncomfortable. And I guess that's sort of the point. We need to be willing to be uncomfortable. If tech leaders with power, money, and resources truly want to help, it might involve putting themselves in uncomfortable positions to directly challenge or implicate them. In the last few weeks of momentum around Black Lives Matter, I've seen so many well-intentioned white people that I really like and respect reaching out and trying to help. But, when you take apart their offers of help, they're actually kind of fucked up. Saying things like, oh, I'll mentor you, or oh, I'll invest in your company, and framing it as a kind of charity. It's still sort of rooted in this place of white benevolence. And like they're giving you a gift, helping you out, to sort of alleviate their guilt around white supremacy. And I hate picking apart what I think are very well-intentioned, well-meaning gestures, but if we're not willing to be critical of this kind of thing, we probably won't get anywhere.
So talk to me about what are you referencing? What's going on during this episode?
What was going on during that episode is that it was 2020. George Floyd had been murdered. I was living in Washington, D.C. People were in the streets. It was a difficult time for me personally. It was a time of reckoning. It was a time of tough conversations. And it was a time where I saw a lot of very well-meaning institutions. I think I was referring specifically to a tech company that I had formerly worked at, who had announced, like, in light of the murder of George Floyd, we are going to be rolling out a mentorship program for Black technologists where we will fund their projects and give them mentorship and funding. And they were being applauded as if they had as if that was charity. And I was looking at the people that they had chosen and I was like, these are brilliant ideas. They should not be framing this like they're deigning to do some nice gesture of goodwill. This should be a mutually beneficial grounded in respect partnership, but the fact that this company was getting applause, like they were doing a kind of charity, really didn't sit right with me. And so this was at a time when, institutions and companies were making these big gestures, I guess, toward racial solidarity. And I guess I was like doing an American Idol thing, just sitting back and judging them as they rolled in.
I think what's something that marks about that time is that, we were all stuck in our houses. This was not the first high-profile case of a black person being murdered by the police, but it was a time when we were all stuck in our house. Everyone saw the video, basically felt like at the same time, and that's all everyone was talking about. So at that point, like the public focus all shifted on one issue, and it was racism at the time. And it seemed like no one actually had the people who did have the answer to solve the problems were just getting money thrown at them at the time, rather than anything that was a realistic solution. I want to throw some facts at you. So my friend TK talks about saying when issues like this happen, the wallet opens, but we always see the wallet also closes. So you have to get your money while the wallet is open, otherwise the wallet closes. And I realized that is a practical example you could apply to most issues that the public kind of shifts on at a time. Mm-hmm. So if it's climate change, the wallet opens, but the wallet will close when the next issue comes, whether that be Homeland Security or the pandemic or racism. It's going to open and close over and over again. So at this time, when we were talking about George Floyd specifically, we looked at this Washington Post article that was published in August 2021, and they said America's 50 biggest companies committed at least $49.6 billion to addressing racial inequality. Those are companies like Apple, Facebook, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson. More than 90% of that money was allocated as loans or investments that they could stand to profit from. More than half in the form of mortgages, and the remaining $4.2 billion of the $49.6 was outright grants. Of that, $70 million went to organizations focused specifically on criminal justice reform, which is where the money probably needed to go the most. Why do you think, what makes it, I don't even know how to frame the question. How do you think, this is a drop in the bucket. What is your reaction? Like, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think first of all, I'm glad that you pulled out the bit about investments that those companies stood to profit from. So it's like interesting, who's really being charitable to who here, right? If it's like, oh, we'll invest in your startup, but we get a little cut of it. It's like, are you helping me out or am I helping you out? But I do think that taking a step back in that time, and also generally, it is so easy for companies to get headlines talking about the promises they're going to make, the changes they're going to make. They're always very big, very lofty. They get lots of applause. And we really need to make sure that we're following up to make sure to get an accounting for where did the money actually go. And it's uncomfortable to talk about, but the point that you made earlier about the wallet opening, I mean, we talked about this in 2020 when racial justice was hot. I had so many conversations with people who were like, oh, well, now that racial justice is popping, I guess we should take a meeting. How many of those meetings actually went anywhere? Zero, right? How many of those, so I guess what I'm saying is it is so easy to make promises and commitments when something is happening, but it's harder to make sure that those are long-term, meaningful, lasting commitments.
I think that is one thing to note. The pledges, all of these that the companies made, these were pledges. So there's not one entity that'll hold any of these companies accountable for this. And corporations aren't required to report where all the money is going. So as of August 2020, the Washington Post analyzed that 44 of the 50 companies tracking the pledges made after May 2020 to charitable organizations, they tracked those, and it was only I think about $1.7 billion that had been spent, again, of the $49.6 billion that actually gone to where it went. Now that's just, what we're talking about here is just the logistical and financial aspect. There was also the emotional response, which is the strong emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. One report listed that DEI job listings grew by more than 123% in 2020. But we're reading the news, we're seeing a lot of those opportunities are gone. As money started retracting from tech, the first thing they started cutting was DEI. Why do you think DEI was the first to go?
It kind of goes back to a conversation we were having yesterday with Barry. I think that, and again, it's complicated. I think that when institutions feel like they're being pushed into doing something, it is so easy for when that moment is over for them to be like, okay, now we don't just want things to go back to how they were before. We want to like, we want to like punish you all for like forcing our hand here. And so I think that we now have this apparatus that is kind of like politicized DEI work, where I think it was Chick-fil-A, they put out a job application or a job announcement just for a DEI person. Not even, it wasn't like anything controversial or untoward happened. And you have people talking about wanting to boycott them just for even exploring hiring somebody in the DEI space. And so I think when commitments are made from a place of feeling like they've been forced or feeling like doing something they don't actually meaningfully want to do, I think that not only will that be short-lived, but it will also, be accompanying sort of a pendulum swinging back the other way when that moment is over.
How do you think, there's an idea, and I heard one of the speakers this morning say that we have to hold companies accountable, like in order to actually make the change that they're promising to make. How do we do that? Like, what is the actual, do you have like ideas on what the actual move is to do that?
So I can speak to what I have expertise in, which is media making and storytelling. The fact that we don't really have any kind of media entity or like tech press that is actually finding accountability from these companies is atrocious. The fact that like you might get a Washington Post article that's like, oh, all those commitments, let's find out how they're doing, one off here or there. But the fact that these companies can just say anything and there's no real way to follow up to see if that actually happened or not without doing a lot of digging yourself is wild to me. It's so unacceptable. So I think one of the things is like really changing our internal calibration of like what information we are owed from these companies, because if a company that is publicly traded says something publicly that is like they volunteered to say, no one's putting a gun to their head and being like, make this commitment. We should be able to follow up, and it should be easy to follow up with how that commitment actually shook out or not.
I 100% agree. What do you think is the driving force behind I'm calling it, and I'm coining this phrase, issue ADHD, where it's this issue today, it's this issue tomorrow, but they're all still important. Like I imagine, and that's one thing about folks being here at Sea Change. Everybody is here working on something specific, whether it be like climate change, sustainable housing, or just sustainability generally. Even when we talk about all of those things, it depends on where we are in that moment as a society as to whether or not the wallet is open and they're getting that money. What do you think is, and this is speculation purely, but what do you think is actually driving that type of attention, that issue ADHD that happens?
Oh, I mean, I couldn't say. If I had to guess, I would say that these companies are companies that maybe lack an internal orientation about like who their people are, what their values are, and so they're not able to be like, oh, well, if this thing is happening, this impacts our people, impacts our values, we need to make XYZ announcement or commitment or whatever. I think that there are companies that don't have that figured out. And so when something big happens, it's like they're not sure if this is, a thing that they need to be acting on or putting a statement out on or not. And so I think part of it is just like a lack of clarity and internal orientation about their values that makes them be like, oh, well, we don't really have clear values, so we need to respond whenever anything happens.
I want to kind of pose that question to the audience, and I want to get an idea of who we have in the room. Is there anybody that's, and you could feel free to raise your hand. I think we have mics. Do we? Okay, great. We want to get an idea of anybody who's experienced having the focused attention of the public on your issue and then suddenly not having the focused attention of the public on your issue, and what that looks like in terms of getting money, the wallet opening and closing. Anybody? Sure. We'll wait for the mic.
Hi. Okay.
Yes.
Hey, I'm Liz. Yeah, I feel like this is happening right now because I work for a company. We're called BBMG. We do branding and marketing, specifically focused on sustainability and social impact. And what you just said, like we help companies figure out what is your core purpose, and then they have like a North Star, and they can help figure out what should they be giving money to, what should they be talking about. A lot of our work with companies around sustainability and social impact now feels like DEI departments are getting cut. Budgets for that work is getting slashed. So like companies are still doing the work in a lot of cases, but they're afraid to talk about it. So our business is communications, and if they're afraid to talk about it, what do we help them with?
Do you feel like you have to kind of control the conversation? Like is there a way to say like we have to stay focused on this issue? Is that what y'all are doing? Or how do you go about that in the communication space?
I mean, a big part of it is figuring out how to focus, because a lot of companies, they touch many things in their philanthropic work or, in their own policies. But if we can help them figure out like their core mission, their whole reason for being, like their DNA of the company, and like what does that orient them towards, I think that gives them the confidence to keep talking about it and keep doing the work. So sometimes that can help.
That's fair. Bridget, in the space of like when you think about what drives you to like look at what issue at a time, do you feel like there's one that you're dedicated to now? And I feel like it probably is with your podcast, but do you feel like it shifts over time, or do you feel like you stay more focused on one?
It's a good question, and it is something that I struggle with. My beat that I've kind of made for myself is the internet and technology, and the reason for that is because I think that the internet and technology is the through line of like so many different issues, whether it's gender justice or environmental justice or racial justice or democracy or elections, like everything. It touches everything, and so I definitely have had times where I've had to really come back to that North Star of like, every issue could be under that umbrella if I worked hard enough, right? And so it's been a challenging process to really focus and narrow down on like, what is it actually that I care about? Who am I actually doing this work for and why? I find that coming back to that orientation really helps me, but yeah, if you let me, I'll be making a podcast about anything. And
Does anybody have any theories on why we as a society tend to move from issue to issue while they remain unresolved? Feel free to spitball. This is where we're rap sessioning. All right, see you laughing. Give him the mic. Oh, no. It doesn't have to be smart, man. We just talking. Linda, did you put your hand up? Okay. We got one up here.
Saved.
I'm watching you. We'll come back to you.
So I'm a podcaster too.
Oh, nice. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, I have a podcast called The Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, and we chose the word conspiracy at the very worst name. Very brave. We're required a lot of bravery in 2020. But I shine a light on what's right with the world, not to diminish all the wrong, which is certainly huge, but we've got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So I've interviewed, I got to tell you, Ronald, he has an amazing podcast of his own.
Thank you.
I absolutely, it's one of the best interviews I've ever done. Anyway, what I really think is going on here, because I've been for 10 years trying to elevate positive news, and not puppies in mailboxes, but the fact that dogs can smell stage 1 breast cancer. And how come we all don't know that? We see. And so I've been doing this for 10 years, and it doesn't seem to get as much traction as it should, given that everybody says we hate the negative noise. We want positive news. And yet we do it in this beautiful way, in this big, giant website with thousands of stories. And here's what I've decided after 10 years. There's a part of our brain called the amygdala that is always looking for signs of danger and disorder. If we're in this room, it's because our ancestors were really good at seeing danger and disorder ahead of time, and so our ancestors were able to reproduce. So our first thing in our brain is our amygdala. That's on 100% of the time, and so we are constantly looking for signs of danger and disorder. And I think that comes out in lots of ways, like what we expect of others, how we jump to assuming bad intention pretty quick these days, how we unconsciously judge even though none of us wants to be judged. It's something in our brain that just is hardwired. And as Carl Sagan used to always indicate, he used to be asked if we would ever get to Mars. And he used to respond by saying, maybe a better question is, who will we have to become to be able to get to Mars? Like there's some human 2.0 that doesn't lead with this fearful part of our mind. So that's where I think a lot of this comes from, is that it's built in to the way we're wired. And I think it's a challenge to always try and pause for just 2 seconds and shift up to some other better question than the questions we've been hearing over and over and over again. And that's why I love what you guys are talking about, is because you guys are asking better, fresher questions. So thank you.
What's your name?
Linda Ulrich.
Linda,
Yes.
I love this. Thank you for this.
Yes. I want to interview you as well.
Anytime.
Too. I've been taking fantastic notes.
This is something, may I respond?
Yeah, what do you can
This is something, I could talk all day about.
Yeah, what are you talking about? You're on stage with a mic.
Fair. This is something I could talk about all day. This feeling of, you want to give listeners and audiences something that they can connect to that is not rooted in fear and is not rooted in negativity. From my work in technology and social media, I can tell you that it's an ecosystem problem. We have all of our social media ecosystems are algorithmically designed to surface us content that makes us anxious and angry and afraid. And it is a real proven thing. Information that is either a lie or inflammatory or hateful travels so much faster on all of our platforms than anything that is positive or thoughtful or not rooted in fear. And something that I've really learned is that fear, it might get you a click. It doesn't get you anything that's lasting longer than that. And there are so many different examples of this. I used to work for a nonprofit where I started, a gender justice nonprofit, where we started during the Trump administration. And so every email that we sent out to our list was like, something horrible that Trump has done. You need to be afraid. You need to be angry. Give us money. And that was effective until it wasn't, because after a while, it was like people didn't want to hear that anymore. You needed to, just telling people everything is awful and you should be angry and afraid wasn't motivating them anymore. And so you really have to give people something else. I see people every day who are really making quite a good living off of giving people fear and anxiety and anger, but that is not lasting. It might be good in the short term, but that's not what brings people to anything. And so, yeah, I hate that someone who is telling a different story rooted in positivity is having trouble getting traction. But I think it's partially how we are as humans. And I think we have an entire online digital ecosystem that is meant to suppress things that are thoughtful and positive while uplifting things that are negative and inflammatory. And so we're all sort of trying to gum up that system that continues to churn out negativity and create people who are hostile and anxious of each other. So yeah, I think I'm glad that you're in this fight doing that, but we need lots of people like you who are not just making content that is more thoughtful and more engaging, but also we have to kind of rewire our brains to not want that, when you see that headline that you know is just trying to get under your skin, don't click it, right? If it's really something that you need to know about, find a source that is not clearly written to make you angry. You can find another source for that that's not inflammatory if it's something that you really need to know. I keep up at night thinking about this kind of thing, so thank you.
I know you're up next, and I have a follow-up question for you, so I'm going to come to you next. But do you think that the perceived solvability of a problem is what makes our attention shift quickly? Because you just said something about the idea of people throwing money, throwing fear, saying this thing is happening, we're going to throw a bunch of money at it, give us money. At some point, it doesn't work anymore. Do you think it's the idea of saying, I keep throwing money at this, and it's not helping, therefore, why don't I throw my money at something else?
I never thought about it that way, but I think there is something to that. I think people like problems that feel solvable. And so if I'm telling you, listen, we have this problem, if you throw me $20 a month, we'll fix it. I can guarantee it. I think that people are okay, I'll do that. But then when it's the problem's still here, I guess I'll move on to this problem that is being framed as solvable. What our brains don't like is messy, institutional, systemic problems where it's there is no check that you could really write that would fix this. It's a institutional, deeply rooted thing that will take all of us thinking differently and rewiring our brains to fix. we hate that. We
Yeah.
don't want to hear that.
But people are still working on that stuff. Like, you're still making a podcast about this. Why do you keep doing it? You know?
Ooh, what are you, my mom? Like, why make podcasts? Go back to grad school.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, because people like you, I do think like when I hear from someone that is like, I read about this thing when I was just scrolling my phone, having my morning coffee, and it scared me, then I listened to your deep dive onto it, how here's the problem, here's the causes, here's why it might not be so easy to fix, but like, here's the people who are working on it. It made me understand it, and I felt better about it. And so I think there are people out there, I think on some level we're all like that. And so I guess I keep doing it because I want to keep speaking to those people who are looking for that kind of thing, who want to be nourished by good, thoughtful content that asks these questions. And when there aren't easy answers, tells you that. Or when it is like thorny and complex, tells you that. When it's uncomfortable, tells you that, but doesn't shy away from it. I think that, an army of people making stuff like that, having those conversations, and an army of people who are interested in going down that road with us, I think can really make a difference. So
I love it.
Well, what keeps you in this?
Well, I feel like you're basically talking about a faith-based perspective, and knowing that you and I both grew up in the church, it's like not surprising that we're like very much optimists. But like, I think what gets me, and even coming to Sea Change, is just I'm seeing people that are consistently working on the same thing for years, no matter what, whether the wallet is open or closed. And so like, I'm always intrigued by that motivating factor of people just saying, well, I'm just gonna keep doing it, whether I have money or not. I'm just gonna scrounge by, I'm gonna keep doing these experiments, keep testing this water, keep doing whatever in order to continue like the fight forward. And I just think there's just a sense of optimism in that person where I think about this, about Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci was doing his job long before there was ever a pandemic. He only just got pushed to the national stage because of the pandemic, but he was already doing his job, and he's probably still doing his job right now somewhere. I don't think he retired. So it's like the idea of saying I'm going to keep doing my job no matter what, whether I'm on the big stage or have a lot of money or not, I think is admirable because it represents some sense of optimism. I wanted to come back to you. You had your hand up. Yes. Here comes the mic.
Could you repeat the initial question again so I make sure I haven't lost the plot?
Lord. I said, why do you think we move from issue to issue unresolved as a society?
I'm going to answer this from the perspective of a 23-year-old consumer. I think that at a point it starts to become a trend, from the nature of social media. It's just so easy to trivialize things and also just become a spectator to it, And there's also a lot of like activism that is just, face value. Like we don't really actually see what people are trying to do instead of just posting about it. I just feel like sometimes these problems are treated like a trend before they move on to the next one.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I have one here and one here, so we'll go Emil and then.
Why don't you go first?
Okay.
Be long in the tooth,
All right.
Thank you. I do a lot of systemic change work. I have been grateful enough to be on Bridget's podcast.
Great guest.
Say it again?
Great guest.
And one of the things that I think about...
Sorry, your name?
My name is Allison Turcos. My pronouns are they, them. And one of the things that I think about in this conversation, which I have a lot of feelings about because I think it's a little bit bullshit that this is a competing session. And I think that every single person who is attending this should be in this room. And I think that it's lost. So I have so much feedback for the organizers of Sea Change, but that's a whole separate conversation because this is just so valuable on so many levels, especially for people who are here to do systemic change work, but side tangent. But I think for me, it's about sort of two things. Is one, that we as a society love to extract trauma from people. And as someone who does a lot of systemic change in a trauma-based space, we love to extract trauma. We love trauma porn. We love racialized trauma. We love sexualized-based trauma. We love trauma that is based in poverty, right? And so we love, like Bridget had said, we love a story on the cover of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or anything. We see what's happening in Gaza. We see what's happening with the migrant crisis in New York City. I think it even happened, I live here in Vermont. I spent my time between here and New York City. We see it happening here locally with people experiencing homelessness and the opioid crisis, right? So like it's a hot topic and we extract trauma from them. And then we like get to the point of feeling discomfort as people who are consuming that trauma. And then the minute that we get uncomfortable, whether it's police brutality and the murders of Black and brown bodies, and then particularly for like white folks, or if it's, you know, regarding what's happening like to the rest in power to Nex, who was a non-binary person who was recently brutally murdered, right? And then if you're a cis person, like the minute that you feel discomfort, you move on because you're like, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm not going to be self-reflective. I'm not going to unpack what's happening for me. And you're like, oh, I'm not going to abolish the cop in my heart, in my head, and I'm not going to like really dive deep and think about how I participate in a carceral system, how I punish my own kids and like punish my friends, and like how I'm like participating in cycles of punishment in the carceral system. And so you just move on. And so we move on to another subject and we're like, okay, now I'm going to talk about the housing crisis, or now climate change is my thing. And so that is, for me, is why I love the thing of ADHD issues. And then the thing that is also coming up for me in this moment is I always use the term in the work that I do is relentless incrementalism. And as someone who does a lot of work, I'm like, I've been doing this work really since like 2017. And like there's work that I do that like no one sees, right? And so like there's major wins that people see, but like I'm doing work today and we don't see it. And so I think that for those of us who are doing it, it's like it is relentless and we're making these small pushes. And so when it's big and the wallet is open, that's incredible. But we just have to keep pushing.
I love everything you said. let me ask you this.
That's why Bridget and I are good.
Let me ask you this. It sounds like you're saying like people are not, when we're looking at an issue, people are not interrogating the problem within themselves.
Never. And I think it's particularly like, as a like white, queer, non-binary person who like has been forced to do a lot of that work, like shout out to the Black and brown people in my life who really like didn't need to do that labor. But like I, you know, grew up in a social justice space. Like it is hard, but like being uncomfortable and being in a space of discomfort is where, right, you become a better person and you become, right, like I don't need allies, I need fucking comrades. Like I need to know that like when shit gets hard that you are gonna show up. Like in Vermont, I use this term called compost racists, where people are like, Bridget heard this last week, where people are like, oh, I compost, I'm not racist. Like I do one, right, I do my one thing, and it's like, motherfucker, you have that sign outside of your house that's like, in this house we believe water is life, Black Lives Matter, and it's like, cool, but like I don't believe you.
Yeah.
I don't think that, right, like when shit gets hard and like people are being shot and murdered in the streets of Burlington, that like you are gonna show the fuck up, because that your sign doesn't tell me shit.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, that's why I call them compost racists, because like I do one good thing, I recycle.
Yeah.
I talk about microplastics.
Yeah.
And it's like, right, and that's why when Dwayne was talking about like small p progressive, I was like, that's what Vermont is. Vermont is not a progressive state. We're not liberal. There's Confederate flags in the state. Like, let's be real. Like you get out of Chittenden County, it's right. And so to me, it's like, that is why like I like to have these conversations. And I'm like, if you're uncomfortable, that's good. And you need to go further and do that work by yourself in a room or with other white people or members of your community.
I think I like everything you're saying, especially when it comes to identity politics and all of that. I think it makes a lot of sense. I feel like that same thing exists even when you talk about something like composting, where we're like, we don't want to do the thing that makes us uncomfortable, even though it extracts the most change. And I think you could do that on a company level and stuff too, because we know when we talk about recycling, see the thing, and I want to be clear, the reason why I'm not talking more about race is because I can get ranty. So I'm going to talk about recycling, because I feel like the idea that...
You and I will get a drink one day, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we can talk about it later. But I feel like the idea of a company which needs to do more, a company that needs to do more. They spent, if we looked at the numbers, $49.2 billion. Now, the number that they were making that year was $515 billion. It was less than 1% of their budget. So they didn't even cut into any of their profits in order to actually contribute that money. That would have been uncomfortable. If they would have did that, that would have been uncomfortable. But discomfort is what we need to actually see change. Emil, you're next.
My God. This is why you're the multi-award-winning podcaster. That was masterful.
Go ahead, Emil. Okay. No, I think they need it for the recording and for the people online.
I'm going to
swear, so.
That's fine.
First off, I just want to bring light and attention. I think that was very well said, and I think that's a conversation that a lot of folks need to hear. The issue ADHD piece, I think Linda spoke on it as well, but naturally the brain is organized to react more strongly to negative-based stimulus than positive ones. That's why you remember not to put your hand on the burner, not because I told you, because I put my hand on the burner, it burned me, and I'm like, I don't want that, so we're not going to do that no more. I think that has a contributing factor to it. I'd like to kind of loop back to this idea of people wanting to be involved to do the work, but then when they figure it out, it's $20 a month and so on and so forth, and they move on to something else. I think people love the idea of being part of the solution. I think people hate the work required to be a part of the solution. I think a lot of organizations come through, they make all these pledges. You can look at 2020, you go back further. Social change and wellness initiatives in organizations is tale as old as time. It just got brought to the forefront 2020, reframed as DEI work, but that should have been happening for years already. You look at everybody that talked about throwing money around. If I give you $20 a month to change the problem, I could do that. But if I have to learn, unlearn, relearn, if I have to tear down systemic inequities, if I have to look at all the contributing factors that lead to these disproportionate outcomes, you're not asking me for $20. That's not what you're asking for. You're asking me to do real work. And I think people love the idea of talking about doing real work. I think people hate the application of real work because I think that work is uncomfortable, and it is naturally uncomfortable. That's why these systemic issues continue to perpetuate themselves. That is the absolute grind that we are caught up in. In order to shift that, you have to turn around and start to undo these things, and that is not a $20 a month solution. So I think part of what keeps folks jumping from thing to thing is certainly the idea of being able to contribute to a solution when it is convenient and when it is comfortable. I think people hate the reality of the work happened. I think that shows itself in a ton of professional spaces, in organizations in particular. CEO could say, damn, George Floyd got murdered. We saw that shit. Killing black people on TV is bad. Here's a couple dollars. And then you bring in folks and they say, okay, cool. Well, actually, some of the stuff that contributes to black people getting killed on TV are these 9,086 different problems that we're gonna start to work back through. And CEO says, hold on. I said we were gonna cut a check. I didn't say we were gonna split profits. I didn't talk about changing policy. I didn't talk about advancement retention metrics. I didn't really talk about, you know what, that's not what really we do as an organization. It was a cool thing to talk about. It's a whole other thing to walk through the work. And I think that's where people get lost. I think Vermont, unpopular opinion. I think Vermont loves the idea of itself as a savior. I think Vermont loves itself as this idea fundamentally different than any other part of the country. I think Vermont loves itself so much that being the second whitest state in the country, the way that this place talks about itself is keeping itself weird. And not for nothing, I think that's rooted in a bunch of good intentions, but keeping this place the way that it has been means continuing to keep this place as the second whitest state in the country. Means continuing to be a place where disproportionate violence happens to black and brown bodies. Continues to keep this place where housing disparities are leading in the country, right in this place where we want to talk about we don't want to grow or develop more housing because we want to turn into New Jersey. Vermont has this idea that it is in love with and enamored with in and of itself, but being any different than what this place needs to be in order to address and not be these goddamn compost activists.
Compost racists.
Compost racists. Yeah, I love that. I'll throw compost activists at that shit too.
Yeah.
But the idea that this place is rooted in being different from all of these other places. I've walked into places with Confederate flags. I have racist run-ins and encounters in this place every day. It is a place that loves to stand up black heroes and loves to tear them down equally quick. And I think there is a real reckoning in this place that is required. And I hope some of it is uncomfortable because I think that's required for growth. But I hope some of it is encouraging as well because this is one of the only places in the country that I believe can start to change things in a significant ways because of the size and scale of this place. I think there's unbelievable opportunity here. I told you I was going to be long in the tooth, so I'll let you run. But yeah, but not for nothing. Keep this place weird? Fuck that. Not for nothing. And I'm not from here. I love this place. I have made a home in this place. I've grown and known myself in a different way in this place. But in order for this place to be what it can be, for us to match up the word with the action, fuck this keeping it anyway. We need to change this place. We need to make this place different. And I hope that part of what we're allowed and the opportunity that's available to us here is not to jump. We don't need to move on to other issues. We have size, scale, connectivity here that allows us to move change in a completely different way than in most parts of the country. And I hope that that's something that we lean into. So that didn't really answer your question. This was more of like a bad guy monologue. But certainly, yeah, those are my thoughts on this conversation. I couldn't agree with you more. We need to get people in the room talking about this shit.
First of all, I love it. I love it. I love both of y'all. They match together. I love the synergy there. Let me ask a question. This might be kind of risky. Did anybody feel discomfort by what was just said? Take a brave soul. All right. How do you feel right now? Talk me through that a little bit.
I don't know how to put it in words. I mean, I know that I agree with everything that both of you are saying wholeheartedly, and I know I'm part of the problem. I know that a lot of the work that I do is in the communication space, so it's the talking but not enough of the doing. And like, for any of it to matter, like, you need both. Like, you need the systems change, and then you need the people talking about it so that other people give a shit, so that you get more investment in the systems change. But one without the other is like not enough. So I'm uncomfortable because I know that I've joined a lot of conversations and not taken enough action in my own life.
What does it look like? Maybe this isn't a question for you. This is just a question for the audience. What does it look like to feel that discomfort and then to act next? Does anyone have a testament to that? Or does anyone have an idea of what that next step is beyond discomfort? Oh, Alex. Okay.
I don't think this is going to answer your question.
Okay.
But I'm going to try.
Okay.
I don't know if I felt discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I've heard that statement from another person before. I've heard that statement before, and I felt it was powerful. But I felt it was inapproachable. And it connected me back to something that you both went on. You said people like solvable problems, right? Like you said, equity is not a solvable problem. It's certainly not a bite-sized one. Neither is climate, neither is pollution, neither is any of the shit that we cover at this event. So it made me think like more strategically, like how do we break this shit down into solvable bites? If you want to have continued attention, is the lead like it's totally broken and we need to fix it, or is the lead like let's fix this, let's fix this, let's fix this, let's fix this, because it's overwhelming and it's unapproachable and it feels unsolvable.
You got to talk into the mic, Alex.
It just feels too big when it's not in a bite-sized portion. Does that make sense?
Yes. Remind me your name.
I'm Allison.
Allison, you said something about something incrementalism. What? Yeah. And I saw your hand back there. We'll come to you next.
Alex, I really appreciate what you're saying, and I so identify with this. And again, I was born and raised in Vermont, and I was born and raised in Underhill, and I left for a few years, or like a decade plus, and I lived in New York. And I think about relentless incrementalism, and as someone who does, like, if you look at my website, my bio says I'm a movement architect for system change, which I think is very bold, very big. But like I think about like small things, right? Like I do a lot of work in police accountability. I do a lot of work in tech accountability. Like I don't mean this to sound egotistical, but like if you've taken a rideshare since 2017, your rideshare ride is safer because of me. If you've taken an Uber or a Lyft, your life is safer because of me. That's huge. That's huge. But like I did that, and I think that like. I love nothing more than to take really hard fucking things and to make them small and easy to digest. And I think that when it comes to things, and I say this as a white person, when it comes to things like race, or when it comes as a non-binary queer person, like gender, and I say this as someone who's born and raised here, right? Like, I love what's your name? Emil. What Emil just said is the idea that, like, it is possible. And I think that what happens is that, and I'm gonna say of Vermont, that and I feel okay saying this as someone who's born and raised here, is that like I see that what happens in Vermont is that people get so afraid of taking even the tiniest step, and even saying like let's just like get in a room and talk about like what we as white folks in Vermont can do. I totally agree. Keep Vermont where it needs to go. So like whoever runs that campaign, they should just go and like collect all those lawn signs, right? Elected officials do it when they're done with their campaign, right? And that is a incremental change that we can happen. And then I think it's just the idea that like in Rutland, they're starting to do like loneliness groups. And I think that we can just have like space for white folks to talk, right? Like what are we doing at our dinner tables? I'm in my chosen family, there are 2 teenagers that I love. And so like with my teens, we're having conversations about race all of the time. Like there's a 17-year-old white boy that will have dinner with tonight. And he and I talk about his race all of the time. So like if you're a parent, are you talking to your kids about race, especially if you're white, or are you not because you see that your whiteness as a default? And that is a problem, right? So like every single day, are you talking about how your white privilege and your privilege as a cis person, and I think then we can also bring in like fat bodies, all of these things, right? So to me, it's like, it is just small. It is just small things and like with your community, right? Like the other thing, and then I'll stop, I promise, is like, I also just think about this like in wellness too. Like food has no value. We don't talk about health in my house. We don't talk about wellness, right? We're never talking about like, oh, I don't want to eat this because it's bad food. These are empty calories, right? So it's like things like that as well. And this is the reason why you can be an activist in your kitchen, in your bathroom, don't own a scale. Like there are ways, right? And I'm like opening myself up, like I will have a conversation with any of you. It is possible. As Miriam Kaba says, hope is a discipline. Like just be disciplined in your hope and it is possible.
Hope is a discipline. That is.
Miriam Kaba, baby.
Yeah. We had one back here.
My name is Sally. This has been such a fascinating conversation so far, and I also had some discomfort, and I'm trying to understand what the discomfort is. And I think it merges a little bit from what Allison was saying and Emil was saying. This type of selfishness that I have is actually because of family trauma. I'm still working on my own family shit that makes it very difficult for me to sometimes think outside my own very siloed in therapy, what happened in my childhood, why am I still working on this, what's up with my family, that happens in my kitchen every single day in such a way that when I see the issues, and I'm onto this issue, and I'm onto this issue, and I'm in this room because I want to be part of solutions in a company that's part of solutions in company with people that want solutions, I'm also wait, I only have so many hours in the day, and my brain is still so consumed in this very selfish way around my own very much discomfort and being uncomfortable about the family trauma that I've experienced. So I wonder how much of this is more of a posit of how much is that happening such that people feel stuck. And I'm not saying that's a white person thing, I think that's an any person thing. And how do we get beyond the discomfort of our own everyday experience and the trauma we've experienced, the generational trauma we've experienced growing up, that frankly, I am doing the hard work, but I'm also when will I have time in my brain to devote to something outside of my own selfishness to feel repaired and healed in such a way to move on to small things that Alex is suggesting to actually do the small things. When will that happen? And I think, Allison, you might say, do it now. There's no time to wait, right? We've got to do it now. But I think I struggle with that because I don't have that model to me, certainly in my own upbringing, right? Which a lot of us are here based on our own upbringings. How do we do that? And maybe that's a future conversation between you and I, but I think that's what my discomfort is how do I get beyond my selfishness?
I think for me, because I just want to be clear, I don't want to just think people came to the session and be we in here white people bashing. That's
Get out.
Because I'm a cis black man and I've had to work through stuff too. You know what I mean? There's tiny steps that I have to take all the time too. I'm a cis black man. I was raised a conservative Pentecostal Christian. Some of y'all know what that means. My dad was a drill sergeant. My mom was a missionary in Sunday school. There's some shit I had to work through. You know what I mean? In terms of, and it all took tiny steps. It all took for me, the idea of queerness for me at 18 was a very different idea. That was a short 20 years ago. Very different idea than it is now. You know what I mean? And I think for me, it took and I didn't even know I was doing it at the time. It was just taking a step, literally just one step. You know what? I'm gonna think the opposite of what I'm thinking right now. You know what I mean? I'm just gonna try that. And I think what we try to do when we try to solve all these issues is that we try to solve all of them at once. We try to solve each and every one of them, and then we get issue fatigue, and then we're like, and like you said, we get uncomfortable, and we say, we're gonna move to this one, because I can't solve this one, what am I gonna do? It's a mess, but it just takes, my mom says to me all the time, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. You know what I mean? That's how you eat it. I don't know why you eat an elephant, but you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So I think whatever your trauma is, whatever each of your individual problems are, you really have to take one step at a time and say, I'm just going to do this one thing. That's something they say in therapy. They say it in church. They say it probably in Buddhism. Like, they say it everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, just one step at a time. And I think one of the strongest steps you could take is when you sense discomfort in yourself, don't leave. Stay. Like, stay. See what happens next. Because in most cases, you'll find that, like, on the other side of discomfort, you're like, oh, wait, this is different. I feel something different now. Maybe you can't even articulate that feeling, but that's what happened for me, going from being like, and the thing was, I was never like GOP conservative, but it was more like men are men, like type of stuff, you know what I mean? And like, eventually I woke up one day and I was just like, I leaned into it. I started to interrogate my own feelings, and I'm like, nah, that's not where I am no more, you know what I mean? And it took just sticking in the discomfort. And I think that's, for me, it's funny because this whole session we were gonna talk about issue prioritization and all that, but what I'm finding is like more of the discomfort is the actual key to solving any of these problems. What do you think?
I completely agree. There's an old like stand-up comedy advice guide that they give people who are doing stand-up, where whatever the reaction your audience is having, particularly if that's a reaction of discomfort, you should stay in that energy, right? Because you're exactly right that pushing through that's where the good stuff is. And I think that, like, you know, when I think back to some of the nonsense I believed that was really regressive, the reason why I was staying there is because it was familiar and comfortable.
Yes.
It's really familiar and comfortable to have that mindset of like, men are men and women are women, or whatever, you know, whatever that the version of that looks like for you. That's familiar. That's like an old blanket that you can kind of cuddle up with. And it really takes pushing through that to get to anywhere good or anywhere interesting. And I just wanted to, I don't have anything like smart to say about it, but I just wanted to thank you for your insights earlier, and just tell you that I so identify with that, the feeling of my own life. I have a lot going on in my own life. Like, I don't feel like I have time I don't have space in my head for anything else. That is a feeling I have felt many a day. I'll just keep it there. And I think something that has been useful for me in those moments is learning to see the ways in which those personal feelings are actually political or social. And so, you know, if I am really feeling emotionally overwhelmed at caring for an aging parent, thinking about like, well, that's actually not a personal issue, it's a political issue. Like, there are policy changes that could impact this issue. Like, it feels super personal for me because I am experiencing it and I am triggered and I am crying and I am upset. But taking a step back and thinking of all the people who are actually dealing with that same issue that is getting me down really helps me sort of see the ways that it's personal and independent, but also collective. And yeah, I really appreciate what you said, and I'm oftentimes right there with you.
Yeah, I actually wanted to comment on that as well, because I think, and not to go against the theme of change and everything, but we're often presented with this idea that we're all disruptors and changing the narrative, and we have someone from NASA talking about how they went to space, and I'm sitting here thinking like, shit, I'm never gonna do anything like that, like why am I even here? But I often sit in the compost racism space. I'm an environmentalist in a very white-led organization. And what I have discovered, right, like working on these really big issues like climate change and that feel so immense, the biggest places where I've seen the most radical change was more in the mundane, like human-to-human interactions. So going back to like what you're saying about like, I'm just trying to cope, honestly, like what I've always boiled it down to is like, if we learn how to be even like 1% a better human, and that could be just like being nice to each other, right? Like validating experiences and being like, yo, I'm sorry that happened, then radical change will come, right? So then going back to your point of like being uncomfortable and like, what do we do and whatever, I think like we just need to disprove this idea that tomorrow we need to find like the solution for climate change and call it a day, but instead like like name and honor like these smaller moments, because we are missing a lot of that, right? It goes back to like your podcast of like good news and why people are not like harping on it, and it's like no, right, like it's actually a statistics number. Like I would love to think that we're all here going to create like incredible things. I know that's not it for me, so I'm just trying to focus on like my little corner of the world, going back to what you're saying and being like, all right, who can I connect with and like work a little bit 1% to like move it to be better. But yeah, just wanted to add that there because a lot of it resonated.
I love that. I want to give a bit of positive news too. So I'm an 80s kid. I was born in '84. How many of y'all remember a cartoon called Captain Planet? All right, great. So y'all know what's up. So in the 90s, there was a show, for those who don't know, Captain Planet. There was 5 people, earth, water, fire, wind, air. No, wind and air are the same thing. Heart. I don't know why heart was there, but whatever. It was, so there was these 5 teenagers that come together. They create Captain Planet. He would solve environmental issues. It was a bit of propaganda at the time, but one thing that always stood out to me was good propaganda. But one thing that stood out to me was that they had this one villain who was destroying the ozone layer. He was just destroying it. He got a big thing that just said CFC, and he was destroying the ozone layer. And Captain Planet came to save it. I remember as a kid, in 2nd grade, 1992, they were like, yo, we got to save the ozone layer, otherwise the Earth's going to burn to a crisp. Oh my God, it's going to be crazy. Do y'all know that the ozone layer is healing?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the ozone layer is healing. So we actually like solved the problem. I think by 2070, it's going to be completely healed, which is wild. So we actually solved the problem. But Linda, you're right. We don't ever hear about anything that it's like we solve it and we're just like, time to look at the bad stuff again. So it's like, I'm not sure why when we get to the place of, even when we're talking about incrementalism, even when we talked about the little victories, even the lift thing that you just said, Allison, like I didn't know that, you know what I mean? But we don't ever hear about these minor victories or celebrate them as accomplishments and use them as fuel moving forward. I don't really have a question.
I was nodding vigorously. I don't know if this relates, but I was thinking about like, I have that problem in my own life. Mm-hmm. You know how it is when you're like making a thing, mm-hmm. and then you're just kind of have to like hustle and get to the next level. I never take a minute to be like, oh, we got to this, we did this accomplishment. Mm-hmm. Never take a minute. It's like always the next thing. And so I think that, I wonder if that's just like an innate human trait where you don't take a minute to appreciate what you've accomplished, or like even a small thing, you're just so focused on what's next. It's something I'm actively trying to rewire about the way that I show up in the world. And I wonder if it's just like, is this resonating for anybody? Is this something that you all, okay, sounds like I'm not alone. Is this?
Linda?
A couple of things.
Yeah, here it comes.
A couple of things. I learned exactly what you just said from a very important person. I connected with Dennis Hayes. If some of you know, he's the founder of Earth Day. He's now 80 years old, and he won't be interviewed because I've talked to him a few times. He's such a great guy. But you won't be interviewed because he's angry. He doesn't think he did enough. Mm. Now, most of us in this room know what Earth Day is. We've spent an April 20th doing something with neighbors or whatever. And I think that was what I noticed, is that when you're trying to solve a problem that lots of people have, you set micro goals for yourself, and if you get half lucky, you're going to achieve some of them. But then you just set the next one, and then you just set the next one. And Dennis Hayes is the founder of Earth Day, and he's sort of an angry older guy. He's a lovely man, absolutely lovely. But he doesn't, what I could tell in the conversations, he doesn't feel like he did enough. Mm. And of course, he's a climate activist at his very deepest core. So really, when you think about Earth Day, it hasn't changed climate change, but he was fighting in the very beginning. So I totally, incredibly see where he's at with that. But that taught me a lot about all the innovators that I interview, is that we're all so aspirational. And everybody in this room is aspirational. I should recycle more, or I should do better about, Black Lives Matter, all the things that we get called upon that drop into our life that we could do better on. And the last thing I want to say about that is that what I've noticed, I'm a dentist for 35 years, and the strangest thing happened in 2016. patients started coming to the dental office and telling us about their traumas. There was something about our presidential election, the whole process, that made it easier for everybody to talk about their traumas. And what we realized is that probably 90% of people are carrying a terrible burden. So just when you see that person that seems so verbose or so with it or whatever, just remember that I really have come to think that in my doctoring life, that 90% of us have a childhood trauma that deeply affects the way we act every single day. And that helps me be a more forgiving and more empathetic and compassionate, is just when I see somebody who's making me crazy. I think, oh my God, if your trauma is as weird as mine, we're two peas in a pod underneath all these places where we disagree. And then that kind of gets back to the disappointment in not doing enough. Because if you're carrying a lot of burdens, you don't have the bandwidth, just like what you just said. You can't go save the world if you're just trying to get through the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we've got to stop punishing ourselves. Like, do what you can do. This is what I've noticed in 10 years of looking at people that are successful innovators. They just did what they could do. Just every day they put one foot in front of the other. They weren't too harsh on others, and they weren't that harsh on themselves. They just found a way to keep going. And I don't know. That's what I can add.
I think we've come up with a lot of different ways in which we're combating issue ADHD, and I've actually been writing down some takeaways so we can get to them. But I just want to let you know, I want to make sure that y'all don't leave with nothing walking out of here. I'll give you questions to ponder and at least one thing to think about. But I want to talk about one other thing, and that's like prioritization of issues. Like, do we need to, like, and I feel like this gets dangerously into the oppression Olympics, which I don't like participating in, but do we need to get to a place of issue prioritization? Because one thing I thought about this morning when Nicole was talking, she was talking about space, and she says the most important thing is that we're all Earthlings, and the only border that matters is the thin blue line of ozone around us. Which I'm like, that is a beautiful idea, but I don't know if we can get there. And in terms of issue prioritization, if our priority is just being Earthlings, for a lot of people, that changes kind of the calculus of how they've lived their lives this entire time. We're going back into discomfort. So I guess I'm saying, like, do we need to be prioritizing issues? Like, what do you think?
I mean, this is far be it from me, a mere Earthling.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's a beautiful vision, and I wish we lived in a world where the only thing that mattered was that we were all sharing a planet together. I also want to avoid making it seem like we're playing issue Olympics, but I do think some prioritization is needed, because otherwise, it can feel like you're boiling the ocean if you don't have and again, I guess it comes back down to this idea of an orienting North Star of, there are so many issues and things that you could take action on, that you could care about, but if you have a very clear, defined sense of who you are, your values, your people, why you're doing what you're doing, I find that will generally answer the question of what should be prioritized for you. That's how I've been in my work, but I would be curious to know, like, what strategies other people have found that work for them.
I agree. Does anybody think about issue prioritization, even in your mind? Any of that? Oh, nice.
This might be more of a question than an answer.
Okay.
And I won't go into the elevator pitch for what I'm building.
Okay. You can if you want to.
Yeah, you feel free.
But, well, what I'm building has a space for people who might be organizing to like creating an event that supports others or the cause or the people in their life that they're passionate about. But then there are also the people that want to show up to support them and lend their voice. So there might be a lot of things that are priorities. Which of them are you willing to lead and beat the drum on, and which are you willing to show up and lend your voice to?
It's funny, I think about that all the time. Like, in terms of, I'm saying, you know what it is? It's especially when we're in a place where I don't know how many wars that are happening right now in general. And I remember sometimes when I think about the issue that affects Ronald, I think about race the absolute most. And it's one that I can also be intersectional on and like support people who aren't like me, but when it comes down to race, it's like that's going to be the top priority for me. So I think if I think about leading the effort, I'm always like, if we're talking about cis black men and racism, sure, maybe I can lead that effort. But in terms of the issues that I'm beating the drum for, they tend to be the ones that aren't necessarily impacting me the most, but are adjacent.
Right.
Does that make sense to you?
It makes complete sense. And I had a similar sort of wrestling with it conversation around how we would talk about the horrible situation in Palestine on the podcast. You know, I had this feeling of like, I should be saying something. I don't feel like I'm an expert, but I know what I feel, I know my values. And I really took a step back and said like, well, what can I contribute? What is something that I know for certain that I have expertise in, that I can speak to? And that is the internet, technology, disinformation. And so we had a whole series all about how internet issues and technology issues and disinformation issues was impacting that situation. And I think giving myself permission to not be like, oh, I'm the expert on this, but using the thing that I know I have expertise in to say something and be of value and be of service really helped me feel, I don't know, less disempowered at a time that was really difficult to know like what the right thing to do or say was.
I like that. It's basically using the idea of you being an expert in one area and saying, how can you contribute that to whatever the problem is? Allison, I'm gonna pick on you. How do you prioritize issues?
I want to acknowledge that I feel like I've taken up a lot of space in this room.
It's all good. This is a rap session.
Content trigger warning. I am a survivor of kidnapping and sexual assault. In 2017, when I was 29, I was kidnapped by a Lyft driver and was sexually assaulted by him and multiple other people. And so my prioritization comes from my personal experience. So like for you, it's like you're a cis black man. Mine is I am a multiple survivor of sexual assault. And so that, like, mine is like sexual assault, the intersection of tech, because I was a Lyft driver. And so for me, it really comes from that. And the thing that really, like, leads that is that how I, as Brittany Packett Cunningham taught me, is like how I spend my privilege. So, like, I'm a white person, right? So, like, for you, it's race. For me, it's like my whiteness supersedes everything. So in 2019, I filed a lawsuit against the rideshare company Lyft, and I filed a lawsuit against the New York City Police Department, which is the largest police department in the world, which is wild to think about. But I knew that, like, as a white person, going up against a billion-dollar tech company, and I'm named in both of these lawsuits, and going up against the largest police department in the world, like being a named plaintiff and putting my name on those lawsuits, and I'm a very public-facing survivor and plaintiff. And so that was a way for me to spend my privilege. And so I like relentlessly fought, but that was always my thing, was that like, I'm gonna use my own trauma and sort of as a way of healing, but it was really like my lived experience. And so now it really just came from my own lived experience.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm like, you can hear about it on this podcast, and if you Google me, but yeah, I like that's sort of what we're here to do. But yeah, I think for some people, right, it can be really traumatizing to use your own experience, and for me, it's just been the idea of, I think for so many of us, like when you go through a traumatic experience, you think, I don't want this to happen to someone else, and for me, I do. As Bridget and I were just talking about like a week or two ago, like I think about like user dignity in the tech world. So like how do we as users, right? And so I just come from like a systems operations space, so yeah.
Sure.
You said that so much more eloquently than what I'm going to try to add to it. But what I'm thinking about hearing what everyone's saying is like, a big challenge is that you have the people who have the trauma or the lived experience that they're trying to process, or that they just have, for better or for worse, like expertise to bring to these issues and these conversations. And then you have the people with the privilege or with the resources to actually move the needle on these issues. And so the big challenge is like, how do you bring those people together? Because some of us just don't have the bandwidth, but maybe we have experience, or we have a point of view that someone who does have the bandwidth and does have the resources really needs to hear. And so a big challenge that I see in the work that I do is like giant corporations who have money and resources and they want to make a difference on these issues, making sure that they're bringing the people into the conversation, who have the lived experience, so that the impact actually matters and isn't just window dressing.
I think that like brings us kind of like full circle almost to thinking about like the wallet opening and closing, and thinking about the idea of like, how do we get the people that have the wallets to actually contribute to the people who have the actual expertise. And to be honest with you, I don't have the answer, which I know is unsatisfying, but it's something it's a question that we need to ponder to say, like, how are we actually making that connection happen? I don't think anybody has a solution right now, because especially if we keep living in a place where we're at the grocery store and they're still putting the onus on the individual buyer to contribute to, like, St. Jude's or whatever. And I'm like, you're a grocery store. Put your profits in St. Jude. You don't need me, so we're not even making that simple connection right there. So we're not very good at getting the money to where it needs to exactly go. And I think that's kind of the issue, especially if the wallets keeps changing every 6 months.
Question on that.
Sure.
I would love to know.
You can just throw the mic. Please don't.
I would love
Please
to
don't.
know what you both think about this. We need to change our deeper truths. Like what we're talking about here is big corporations, let's say, that put out an effort to be more diverse, or any of the things that they might, we've been saying, roll along and roll up, and then they open their wallet and they close their wallet.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we stuck with a lot of corporations? They can say lots of things, but their deeper truth would have to fundamentally shift for them to stay on it. I interviewed the guy who co-wrote the book with the Unilever, the CEO of Unilever. It's really great. It's called Net Zero, and this is at the highest level of corporate industry in the world, and they are starting to try to make change for climate change's sake and all that. But in the bottom line, that Unilever's deeper truth is to make money, and they got to have plastic bottles to make money at almost anything that they own. So talk to us about what you've seen with this. We're calling it good intention, but I don't know if it's really that, if their deeper truth, if they're always stuck with their deeper truth in the end. Talk to us about what you think about that.
I don't have the answer. It's a great question, but it's something, I see it time and time again, and I get frustrated with it, where, I don't want to, we have 10 minutes left, I don't want to go off on a rant, but, a company like Meta that owns Facebook, in my opinion, it's a company that I shit on all the time because I think they're evil. And they will often put out these little things where it's like, oh, for Black History Month, we're going to be spotlighting 12 Black creators. And all I want to say is, if you were truly invested in any kind of racial solidarity or racial justice or fixing our democracy, you would shut down. You would all be out of jobs. You would not be working here. Facebook would not exist. And it is frustrating to me to have to be like, oh, good job, like, Black people on the homepage, way to go. When I know the deeper truth is, not only are they interested in making money, they don't care if it involves hurting people, creating a chaos in our democratic systems to do it. And so, yeah, I guess all of that to say is that I grapple with the same thing. I don't think anybody should be deluding themselves that corporations, that institutions really care deeply about something other than making money, because we have to be clear with ourselves that, like, that's why they exist. I don't think that means that there's not, like, good to be done or resources to be extracted and, reinvested in the right places in that system, but I do think having a healthy, reality and orientation about why they do exist is perhaps important in this work. I would love other.
Valerie June raised her hand.
Oh.
We are performing for Valerie June.
Grammy nominee,
Grammy nominee Valerie June.
Right?
Yeah.
Talking shit.
I love this whole, just the conversation. And as we've gone along, I've had a few questions. And one is, around the ADHD with issues. What does it look like to collectively say no to the money, And then as a Black person, seeing all the money that was given during the time, I just was questioning the whole thing in the sense of, well, is that really creating true change? Like, what is our collective goal for Earthlings and for humans and for our people, African Americans or African people on the planet, dark people? And is this money gonna solve it? And so, like, as the money was rolling, I was like, I don't feel good about taking that money, because what I want to see happen needs to happen regardless. But they call me a fool. I am a dumb ass, a motherfucking fool, because you're supposed to get that money, right? So the whole time I'm thinking about, like, all of the subjects of what we've been discussing, the big thing that's been on my mind is the money. Because if they can make money off the change, off, what sexuality and sexual orientation, if they could be monetized, or if blackness can be monetized and sold, then they'll keep investing in it. So, like, but what can we do? Because we know that. Could we say no to the money? Collectively, with all of these issues, bring all the issues together and say no to the money. I don't, we probably can't, because somebody's going to give, right?
Yeah, it's so tough. It's a good question, but like I got to be pragmatic and say, like, because for me, when the money was flowing, I was telling every colleague, get your checks.
Yeah.
Because again, TK says, like, the wallet opens, it's going to close. And I'm like, and I actually don't think you're foolish for not taking it. Because I think if your morals are stronger and you can't take it, I'd say more power to you. I don't call you foolish for that at all. But it seems like if we could at least try to get the money in the right hands, you know what I mean? Maybe there is some good we could do, but we built a capitalistic system so that so the only way that we can solve it is either by completely busting the system or solving it with more capitalism, which feels almost like an impossible task. But like, people still have rent. You know what I mean? So it's hard to like say, I'm gonna say no to this grant or whatever when like we gotta pay rent, we gotta keep the work going, or this might keep our foundation going for another 6 to 12 months. And to be honest, like the money didn't even get to where it went. Like we saw the report, it was less than 1% a year later, you know what I mean? And the money wasn't even going where it's going. We're in 2024, DEI shutting down, you know what I mean? You asked a good question. We have 6 minutes left.
Not just for us. I'm just talking about like all issues,
Yeah.
collectively taking them all and all saying no. We don't want your money because that ain't gonna
you're talking
solve
about
it.
revolution.
The inner truth is
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sure am. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Valerie, that's revolution. Like, you talking revolution. Look, go ahead.
I have one quick thing to say in terms of like what it looks like to model saying no. I'm not even sure if I can say this, but whatever. So I am in like grant writing spaces with major funders, and right now, currently, there is like an underground campaign of people who deal with major grants and major funders in the space being like, yo, if a major funder backed off of funding DEI work, we would like their names, because when that pendulum swings back around and it's trendy again, we want to make sure it's really clear where their priorities were, what their values looked like in this time when DEI is sort of being like politicized in this way. So I think there are rumblings of people being like, yeah, we're going to have long memories. Just because you can cut a check doesn't mean we have to cash it. So I think we're almost kind of there.
I also like the idea of like making it a memory thing, saying like we're not going to forget, because I think we do forget. And I mean, there's stuff I don't forget. Like, there's like artists that I still don't bang with because they did one thing in 2013. Where I'm just like, did y'all forget about this thing? You know what I mean? And I was almost going to say a name. You can talk to me later. I'll tell you exactly who I'm talking about. But like, I don't like that. Or like the guy in Boston who like, never mind.
I'm forever the person who was like, oh, you like Jerry Seinfeld? You know, we dated a high schooler.
Yeah,
Look
I'm
it up. I'm that person in the comments, and you're like, oh, of course, they're going to bring this up.
But like, memory is an important tool in terms of saying, like, you did this and you backed off of it. And I think that's incredibly important. We have 4 minutes left, and I want to give y'all the takeaways before we run out of time, and I want to leave you with a quote. And I'll say these both. If we have any time left and anyone has a comment, you can eat the rest of the time. But here's our takeaways, questions to ponder for you. The first is, how do we make big problems into small ones? These are internal questions. You need to keep that question in your heart. How do we make big problems into small ones? What is the one thing you can do to lean into your discomfort? What is the one thing you could do to lean into your discomfort? What are you an expert on, and how can you contribute? And the last one's not a question, it's just a statement. Give space to celebrate your accomplishments, whatever those may be. And y'all can use these either for this or for your life. But we all came up with this together. And I want to leave with an Octavia Butler quote. Somebody was quoting Octavia Butler earlier. I also want to quote Octavia Butler. First, forget inspiration. Habit is more dependable. Habit will sustain you whether you're inspired or not. Habit will help you finish and polish your stories. Inspiration won't. Habit is persistence and practice. You don't start off writing good stuff. She's talking about writing. You start off writing crap and thinking it's good stuff, and gradually you get better at it. That's why I say it's the most valuable. One of the most valuable traits is persistence. And I think that speaks to incrementalism. I think that speaks to us sticking and making it a habit, doing it over and over again no matter what, and not letting the wallet be the inspiration for whatever it is we're going to do next. You just have to stay consistent with whatever you're doing. That's all I have to say. I'll leave you with the last words.
I wasn't expecting that, but yeah, this has been really helpful for me. I feel like I learned a lot, and I guess I just want to thank all of y'all for showing up and being really courageous and really vocal and really vulnerable and really contributing, because I feel like in a different room, this might have hit differently, but I'm really, really happy with how this conversation went.
Yeah. Give yourselves a hand.
Yeah, I guess I have to throw it back to you all.
Yeah.